Are you looking for a new job or interested in leveling up? Job Search Radio is your go-to resource for insider tips on job hunting and growing your career. Here's your host, Jeff Altman.
Hi, this is Jeff Altman, the Big Game Hunter, and I'm your host for Job Search Radio. You know, I've been a professional recruiter for more than 40 years now, and one of the things I've come to realize is that job hunters, career professionals, employees in general struggle with the notion of branding themselves. They don't understand why it's really important. They don't really know how to do it well. So I thought I would bring someone on the show to talk with you about why brand and effective ways to do branding. So my guest is Marie Zimenoff. Marie, please introduce yourself to the Job Search Radio audience and let folks know about your background.
Yeah, Jeff, thank you so much for having me on the show today. Since we're going to be talking about branding, I will stick to branding in my introduction here. My name is Marie Zimenoff, and I run a career services practice called A Strategic Advantage. I am a master strategist for branding, trained by the Reach Branding Association, led by William Arruda. And I don't know if you've heard about him, but I'll be sharing some of his tips with you all today. What I do when I talk to people about branding is really help them figure out their focus, what they're selling, if you will, and we'll talk more about that today, as well as who their market is, who their audience is, and then the brand piece of that in terms of how they relate their unique selling proposition, their unique skills and unique value to their audience. And that process of branding is what we're going to be talking about today.
Terrific. So Marie, why does it matter that someone brands themselves? What's the point of going to this effort to do it?
So I think the surface level answer there is that if you're not branded, you're generic. And so think about yourself, Jeff. If you go to the store and you want to select a product, you might choose based on a brand that you know and like, and usually it's because that brand has a unique selling value, right? If you choose to buy Levi jeans, it's because they'll stand up a long time and you'll get to wear them a long time, and you might pay a little bit more for those Levi jeans than the generic brand. My
favorite example of that is detergent. I've never known anyone go to the store and pick up a box of detergent and compare it with another one and say, the interrelationship of these chemicals is going to be far better to clean my laundry than this one will, and purchase on the basis of quality. Instead, they buy the brand. They buy it because they have a coupon or the price, never because of the quality of the product.
Yeah, and so you just got at the other thing that people buy for there. Usually they buy a generic brand because it's the lower price. And so as an individual, and especially as a job seeker, if we don't want to be bought because we have the lowest price, which I would bet that most job seekers don't want to be bought because they've got the lowest salary requirements, right? If we don't want to be bought for that reason, then we need to be bought for our brand, for the unique value that we're going to build a business. But there's also a deeper reason that I think branding is important, and this comes from my lens as a career counselor. So I'm a trained nationally certified counselor, and what I see with a lot of people is that they don't know their true value because they don't have a clear picture of what they want to offer in a business, and they don't have a clear picture of who their audience is. And so the process of branding helps them know how they're unique and how they offer unique value, but it also gets at that very critical level that a lot of people don't get to really digging into what are they basing their job search on, right? What skills are they saying they're promoting, and who is their audience? And you can't build a brand if you don't know those two things. And from what I've seen, you don't have a very successful job search if you don't know those two things.
Basically, what you're doing instead is deferring to the winds of the job market at that point, as opposed to being able to stand with confidence about what you're able to deliver to an organization and what's really right for you.
Exactly. You end up changing your story to match a job description, and usually ends up taking a lot of time and a lot of energy, and it falls flat anyways because it's not a real match, right?
The employer can smell the fact that you're trying to BS them, and that's not the way you want to be presenting yourself. As a search professional, I know what my value is, and I only work on engagements that make sense for me. When firms try to get me to compromise my standards in my work, I politely decline the assignment, which kind of stuns them because I know how many recruiters will back down in a moment. So for the job hunter, rather than about me, where do they start figuring out their value or what their wants are or how to craft the brand?
Well, so I typically start with folks, again, very at that basic level. What types of skill sets are you wanting to promote about yourself, and how can we package those? It doesn't mean that the skill sets have to be really narrow, but it does mean that we have to know how we're going to package them together. So if you want to say that you're an operations person and a software programmer, for instance, we might want to choose one or the other, or we might say, okay, we're going to package those together for a very specific reason and then towards a very specific audience. If we try to say, well, I can do this or that, you just end up sounding like I can do anything, and we all know that when you say you can do anything, you end up attracting no one, right?
And so it's being the jack of all trades and the master of none.
Exactly. And so we can package you as a jack of all trades, but we've got to be very clear about the value of that and presenting it to the right audiences, because that value is only going to be perceived by some audiences. So that's where I start with people is what is it that you really are good at? What is it that you really want to do? And with most experienced job seekers, it's that what are you already an expert in, or what do you want to become an expert in that already uses the skills you have? Because most people aren't going to start over. They don't want to start over salary-wise, and so we can't start over skills-wise either. We have to draw on those existing skill sets. They may be pointed in a little different direction or to a different audience, but we've got to start with those skills that they're already good at, have some track record with, and want to use. And that's the basics of the internal of their brand. And of course, the external of their brand is what's the market looking for? What are their potential audiences? What do they need right now? And to me, the brand is in the center of those two things. It's not all about you. If it's all about you, you might be presenting a message that nobody cares about. And if it's all about the audience, it's going to be fairly superficial. It's not going to have much depth. And so it's that middle point of what is the unique value that you offer, what's the market looking for, where do those two things intersect that I work with people on as the foundation of their brand.
So let me create a hypothetical for you, and let's work on this one example. Let's say, hypothetically, I'm a manager in an eBay or a Yahoo, just for the sake of argument. I'm a technologist. I've been working on e-commerce systems. I've been thinking that it's time for me to move on, that I'm kind of tapped out where I am right now, and I now want to explore something different. How would you work with someone like me to craft that brand message about what my experience is? And I know I've given you very thin information to work with, but I just thought it might be an initial way that we could illustrate the importance of branding and how to do it.
Yeah. So starting at the kind of the depths in terms of, so you've been in technology, you've been developing e-commerce. Do you want to stay on the technical side of that? Are you looking to get more management roles?
I think
if you're looking for
the management. I've been a technical manager for a while, but I want to move up and go to my next stage in my career. I haven't made director yet. I think I'd like to move up into a director's role.
Okay. So then we'd look at the skill sets, obviously, that a director has, and I'd ask you about your strengths as a leader, your strengths as a developer. What do your teammates say about you when you've had the chance to be a lead on a project or be in a manager type of role? And then we'd look at the organization. So if you're looking to stay in high tech, those similar kinds of organizations, what do you know they need out of a leader? What have you seen that leaders do really well in those organizations that make a difference? What do you think some leaders haven't been doing in those positions? And so we build this kind of picture of what your strengths are, what they're looking for, and then we'd move into, okay, so now that we know that those two things align in these ways, that these are the strengths you have that also add value to what they're looking for, then we can move into the more technical parts of the branding in terms of, I don't think branding is flowery. Branding doesn't have to be flowery. So I'd say, okay, here are the strengths you have that align with what the business is looking for. When have you demonstrated these strengths? What accomplishments do you have that speak to these strengths? And I'd get it hard pretty quickly, right? I don't want to be all about the adjectives and the fluff. It's really, it can be built on solid accomplishment stories still, but the accomplishment stories that you choose to tell are the ones that are building your brand, right? It's those, these are the things that you're going to highlight. That's building your brand in a very strong way without all the fluffy, frilly adjectives. It's really focused in on, this is the value that I offer. And of course, as we're going through that process, there are going to be certain adjectives that keep coming up, or certain words that you would use to describe your strengths that we do want to use as you talk about yourself and write about yourself, but it doesn't have to be predominantly these adjective words. And sometimes I think people get carried away with that when they're talking about branding, right?
I agree with you wholeheartedly. And I want to continue this conversation, quite obviously, but I first want to pause and do my job search insider tip for this show, which, folks, is going to be about crafting a resume. Now, this is going to be a detail in the resume rather than the sort of things we were going to be talking about perhaps going forward in this show. And the detail I want to cover with you is your contact information on the resume. Now, I've been seeing a lot of resumes in recent times from individuals who are not putting their location on the resume. So it's a name and a phone number. Now, I understand that for some people, they have a concern about identity theft, and they don't want to put a street address. But it's useful to you at a minimum to include your city, state, and zip code on your resume, particularly if your phone number does not correlate with the part of the country that you're looking for work. So, for example, I see a lot of resumes with 408 area codes, and these are people who at one point or another moved to another part of the country. How would I know that? So with regard to city, state, and zip code, another variable is ultimately you are going to wind up in someone's applicant tracking system with the hope that at some point in the future you get a tap on the door, metaphorical one, of course, and you're invited to consider a position that fits your background in a particular part of the country. Well, most of us wind up doing searches based upon zip code. That's the way the tracking systems help us to maintain some of the contact with people for particular jobs. No zip code, we won't find you. So my encouragement, again, is minimally put in your city, state, and zip code as well as your phone numbers on your resume. You don't have to put your street address in, but you do have to get that in there in order to ensure that going forward, and I mean going forward, not the next job search even, but even in this job search, we have a way of knowing where you are and thus knowing how to find you. So let's come back to Marie and continue our conversation. So we've been talking about no fluff in this. We're trying to get very quickly to the point of understanding a person's professional strengths, avoiding the flowery terminology. We spoke about that. I don't know if you've seen any of Sally Hogshead's work about fascination, but she gives people this test and tries to key people into one of 64 different categories with two adjectives that might fit their background. I remember one of mine is bold. I like that word. But I think people get caught up in adjectives, like you said, because they associate those adjectives with how Madison Avenue sells and flowery language and stuff that's designed to puff people up. I agree. It's important to just get down to brass tacks quickly and create an image and an appearance, which is why I branded as the Big Game Hunter years ago. I don't think anyone questions that I do recruiting and that I try to do it in a particular way. That was a good choice for me, not necessarily a good choice for the job hunter at this point. So in trying to intersect the individual with the employer, I heard you start to talk about looking at ways to understand what firms look for. Are you suggesting people start doing informational interviews, or how do they do that kind of research in order to really understand what an organization might be looking for that kind of fits them?
Yeah, they can definitely do some research. I'm going to tell you that I'm not a big fan of the informational interview term. Just I've seen it turn more people off than it does help. So I usually tell people this, just say they're doing some research, right? Researching the company, researching the industry, whatever kind of research they're doing. And that can be a great way to learn about the company culture. Most of the people that I work with have some idea of that company culture already, although doing the conversations with other people that already work there or that used to work there definitely add value. Some of it, and it depends on that person's focus, right? So for you, in your example as the e-commerce person, you had specific companies that were of interest, and so you could do that research. For some people, it might be more industry-based, and so we can do some research within that industry or just some common sense, right? If you're looking at the oil and gas industry and you've been in that industry, you know what some of the points are, that pain points, if you will, the pain points that might be there. Then you can do some further research, pain points for that specific company, maybe even by looking at news releases, what's going on in the company, talking to people, all of those research points to figure out what is important to the audience is critical. And I think that this is, to me, one of the points that a lot of people miss most of the time is the audience. And I've even seen marketing people miss it. And they're getting paid, big bucks to do a marketing campaign, and you can tell they had no focus on what the audience was looking for. They just had their own vision. And so before people even start a resume or before they go back and look at their resume, this, I think, is critical to know what you're selling and who your audience is, because if you already have a vision for your resume that's separate from those two things, it's not going to work, right? Or your LinkedIn profile or whatever it might be.
We agree wholeheartedly. When I coach people to interview, one of the things I always talk with them about is when the interview begins, to thank them for making time to chat with them, and continue by saying, I spoke with Jeff Altman about the job, and he gave me a brief description, but I want to get your take on the role. Could you tell me about the role as you see it and what I can do to help in order to ensure that a person's on message when they talk about their experience and actually mesh it to the current thinking about the job? You're saying much the same thing from the resume perspective, to ensure that a person is on point with what a potential employer is interested in. They have to get real clear about what's going to resonate with employers in that field.
Exactly. And then you develop some of your marketing tools, let's say, and you've got to decide what marketing tools you're going to use. And this is part of branding, right? Brand is the concept. Brand is like your slogan. All of those pieces are part of brand. But branding is the active process of promoting your brand or communicating your brand. And so people come up with a slogan, but for a job seeker, that might not be as important. And people spend a lot of effort coming up with, a tagline or something for their resume, and I don't know that it has the ROI, right? I don't know that a tagline at the top of your resume, if it's not something that just jumps to you, if spending a lot of effort on that is probably not going to be worth it. Spend the effort pulling out the accomplishments that match your brand, really speaking to those points on your resume versus spending all this time trying to come up with a clever tagline. If a clever tagline's not your thing, it's not your thing, right? That's okay.
I could see it on a LinkedIn profile. I can't see it on a resume. And I know there's...
Yeah, and even on the...
Please continue. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. Even on LinkedIn, some people do have a clever headline, right? The line right under your name. But if it's not coming to you and there's nothing that's just jumping off the page, having a clear, concise headline is perfectly fine. And so I want to talk a little bit about LinkedIn itself. LinkedIn as a branding tool has shifted. So if you're a job seeker on LinkedIn, beware, because the LinkedIn brand of I'm actively seeking work is becoming less desirable. That kind of salesy job seeker pitch on LinkedIn is becoming less desirable as the job market shifts, right? That there's more people who are working that recruiters like yourself have to pick from, and every recruiter I've talked to says that they'd rather pick a passive candidate than an active candidate. So if you are an active candidate, an unemployed or actively seeking something different, beware on LinkedIn not to have a brand, I think, that is too pushy as a job seeker. I think you're better off with a brand on LinkedIn that still positions you as an expert in your field, that thought leader in your field, even if you're unemployed, versus that heavy job seeker brand on LinkedIn. So talk about your accomplishments, but talk about them in the context of where you've been and as that expert in what you've done, not in that, here, look at all my accomplishments, don't you want to buy me kind of phase. And there are some industries where that really pushy sales pitch might work. Obviously, if you're in sales or marketing, it might work. But if you're a manager, executive, leader, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this as a recruiter. All the recruiters I'm hearing are saying that they want that passive candidate who's successful and doing well where they are. And so I'm helping job seekers who are more active build a brand that feels like that and positions them as an expert rather than positioning them as a job seeker.
I happen to agree with you, but for different reasons. One is, the reason I believe is that people like me many years ago helped to create the myth of the passive applicant. So, at a time where I was New York-centric, and I didn't have a big advertising budget because back in the Stone Ages, people would advertise to find applicants. We didn't have LinkedIn or any sort of databases. We were all paper-driven. So, since I didn't have the budget to advertise, what I did to attract people, attract corporate clients, was to say, I look for the best person who might fit your requirement, not just the best person who reads the New York Times on Sunday. And by doing that, disparage the active job hunter and create the impression that I was trying to find people who weren't actively looking for work. Now, this has become a mantra in the recruiting business, and on a previous show, I poked a hole that's as big as the Queen Elizabeth that you could run a ship through, just by simply saying, if I find a resume on LinkedIn, but the same resume exists on a job board, and it's encoded so I don't know who it is, because I found it on LinkedIn. Is it a passive applicant or is it an active applicant because it exists on a job board? Same person, two different ways. It's just a question of how I found it. So, because the bias exists, it's very useful to work with that bias and to take advantage of it. So you're right. It's best to create that aura that you are not an active applicant because it seduces the recruiters, both corporate and third party. So That's my opinion on the subject.
Yeah, no, that's great. And so, I think there's part of that brand that is, market-based in a little different way, like where the recruiting market is. I think people are really into the, thought leader or expert, right? What are you an expert in? And so I work with a lot of my clients after we've figured out the brand in terms of what their strengths are and where they want to go, then what does it make sense to position them as an expert in so that they can get found, right? If they're going to be out on LinkedIn and trying to build their brand that way, or be on Twitter, one, we're going to choose which medium they pick based on their skill sets in their market, right? Because I did a whole show on brand or social media and how to choose a social media based on your market and all of those things. But the branding part of it is which communication channels do you choose. Obviously, I recommend LinkedIn to job seekers just because of the number of recruiters that are on there. But based on their brand, they may also want to be on Twitter, changing up a little bit what they're doing on Facebook, or doing some specific industry things like GitHub, their professional associations. They might want to speak at a professional association. And those things can all be done whether you're employed or not, right? Building your brand no longer is equated with being unemployed.
So why would you choose Twitter versus another platform? Or were you thinking of Twitter as a secondary source for certain professions?
So to me, Twitter would be important for someone who's really trying to build their brand in high-tech arenas, companies similar to Twitter, Google, those industries that are hyper-technical, hyper-technology driven. And usually people who are building a brand in a more sales and marketing kind of way. So whether they're an executive, they're a salesperson, they're a marketing person, they're a social media person, obviously. Those people who are more technical in terms of operations management, product management, if they're in an industry that's not hyper technology focused, Twitter may not be as important for them. They might still want to use some of the Twitter job search options, but they may not need to get really worried about how frequently they're posting on their own, how many connections they have on Twitter or followers. It may just not be as important for them. And we've got to prioritize. Not all of us can do all of that, and if the ramp up learning curve is too big, it may not be worth it if you're in certain fields.
I think one of the fun things to Twitter, I was helping a friend of mine in recruiting with another firm last week, and she was trying to find someone with a particular technology skill. So I pointed her to search.twitter.com, and we were looking for people with that particular skill. Monday morning, she arrives at her office, and there's a message from Twitter. Hey, we saw that you were looking for such and such. Here are some people you might want to follow. Well, for you as a job hunter, for you trying to cast an image as an SME, subject matter expert, doing the search may be enough for Twitter to activate recommendations of people for you to follow that might allow you to develop relationships with people. Again, as part of building a brand and networking. Yeah.
Well, and that again depends on the job seeker or professional being clear enough about their brand that when you search for that term as your SME, they come up, right? And so just all goes back to that. The crux of a good brand is that clarity. And then how you communicate it depends on your audience, right? If you're going after that technical audience, you might want to be on Twitter so that someone like your recruiter friend can find them. That makes perfect sense.
So if I can wrap up so far, I've heard you talking about getting clear about who you are and how that intersects in the market that you want to provide service to. and thus understand what firms are looking for that might parallel your interests or encourage you to adjust a little bit so that you can connect with organizations you want to be associated with. And you spoke earlier about some of the ways that people can get clear about their brand and avoid some of the flowery terms or slogans that people associate with branding. Now, we're starting to come up on the end of our time with one another for this show, and I want to give you a forum to make sure that you cover any other points that you think would be useful for my audience in order to understand how to brand or the importance of branding.
Yeah, so I think we've talked about the back end, so just a little bit more about the communication piece as we wrap up here. Just to think about all the different mediums that you can be using and how you can...
Maria, I need you to speak up a little bit more. I'm having trouble hearing you now.
Okay. So we'll talk about the back. We talked about the back end. Now we'll talk about the communication piece of it. Thinking about how you can share examples of what you've done, examples that show your thought leadership, your subject matter leadership, right? Whether that's a white paper or a presentation, slide share. There's so many mediums now to communicate your brand that it's really sitting down and thinking about what makes sense for you and how can you leverage information that you already have and just put it out in a new way on a new medium so that you can continue to get visibility as that thought leader. And I think these are things that people aren't used to doing, right? We're only giving a presentation when our company tells us we have to. Well, now there might be some weird reasons for you to go seek out those things for yourself so that you can build your own brand and move in the direction you want to move in your career. And so it's become a much more proactive process by you as a professional to make that happen so that you can get where you want to go versus having your company help you do that. Their opportunities are still there and your company will support you. You might just have to seek them out a little bit more if that's the direction you want to go. And those are some of the ways you want to get your brand out there because it's not going to magically happen, right? People aren't going to know that Jeff is the big game hunter of recruiting until he starts telling people that he is. And obviously you've developed a radio show to do that for yourself. And our clients are professionals out there who want to take their careers in a different direction or take that step up, have those opportunities as well to brand themselves and then communicate that brand in so many different ways. Whether they're unemployed or employed, they've got those opportunities.
We agree. And folks, I'll just remind you that it's not just about a one-time activity. You know, one of the things you need to do is to repeat the branding and to do it regularly. Not just one time, but make the effort continuously, not just simply in this job search, but while you're successful in your next organization, before you get to the point of needing to change jobs again. Getting a clear picture of what your unique selling proposition is, what your unique qualities are, and then continuing to mesh them with the market, because if you want to be an expert in something that your job area doesn't really care about, well, you're going to wind up with career problems later on. So constantly taking the pulse of your market becomes important so that when the next recession hits, and I know another recession's coming because that's the statistical probability. We're going to have another downturn at some point, folks, right? So you have to be prepared for the next one, just in case, and not wait till the last minute. Marie, thank you so much for making time. How can people reach you and find out about your work?
So people can find me at astrategicadvantage.com, so the letter A, strategicadvantage.com. Or I'm happy to connect with people on LinkedIn and add value to your network on LinkedIn. I am the only Marie Zimenoff, MarieZimenoff on LinkedIn, so that's kind of fun, and they can connect with me there as well.
Perfect. Marie, again, thank you for making time. And folks, we'll be back again with more job search advice. I'm Jeff Altman, the Big Game Hunter, and come over to my website. Go exploring. I think you'll find a lot there to help you. This is Jeff Altman. Have a great day. Take care.
For more job search advice, visit Jeff's website at thebiggamehunter.us. That's thebiggamehunter.us.